Well, it's only 27 verses
Don't
tonight.
say that.
Okay, I won't say that. We got to be about an hour and a half planned, maybe 2.
There you go.
There you go. That's
But I have a special slide. I was worried the other night that I had picked on Donnie too much, and he's trying to say never pick on him more. So I have brought for him a special opening for tonight's session. So why aren't chickens allowed in church, Donnie? It's because they only use foul language.
I wish you'd find me that black and white dog right there.
Yeah.
I'd like to have that one.
Even better to have blue eyes.
So I looked at that and I thought, you know what? That is Trey and Donnie right there.
Trey's the one that's almost asleep. Which one's which?
So, all right. So we're in Proverbs chapter 4 tonight. We'll read verses 1 through 9. We'll just go ahead and pull it up. I'm in the New Living Translation for just about everything. A couple of verses I'm bringing out of the King James, but reading Proverbs, just going through the New Living Translation, that way it's more modern English, and it's actually a lot less difficult to decipher than some of that ancient English. So it starts off, we'll read verses 1 through 9 here. My children, listen when your father corrects you. Pay attention. Learn good judgment. For I am giving you good guidance. Don't turn away from my instructions. For I too was once my father's son, tenderly loved as my mother's only child. My father taught me, take my words to heart. This is a quote. Take my words to heart, follow my commands, and you will live. Get wisdom, develop good judgment. Don't forget my words or turn away from them. Don't turn your back on wisdom, for she will protect you. Love her, and she will guard you. Getting wisdom is the wisest thing you can do, which sounds a little redundant, but we'll get into that. Whatever else you do, develop good judgment. If you prize wisdom, she will make you great. Embrace her, and she will honor you. She will place a lovely wreath on your head. She will present you with a beautiful crown. So, once again, we see, as we do through all of these first 4 chapters, we see the father-child or the parent-child relationship working here, right? And we've talked a little bit about that. God being the Father, all wisdom coming from Him. It's almost as if God is speaking to us, right, as His children. Pay attention. Take what I'm telling you to heart, which is just another way of saying bet on it, bank on it, right? Put it into action in your lives. But here we see a little more of the personal instructions. In verse 3, he says, I too was once my father's son. Right? And if we were going to bring that into today's English, I'll bet every man for sure, probably every mother, every father, every mother, right, has used a version of this adage, right? Something like, well, when I was your age, right? And that's what it is. And so Solomon has stepped into this conversation here, speaking to one of his children, and he is quoting his father, David. And of course, David being the apple of God's eye, right? And so David's wisdom would have come from years of following after and relationship with God. But he reminds the reader that he was once a little boy. a young man. And we use these phrases, right? Back when I was growing up, and how often have we, you know, now that you're thinking about it, right? How often did you use that? I mean, you know, we joke about it a little bit. Excuse me, we joke about it a little bit, but, you know, it's like, you know, back when I was your age, I was walking to school, uphill, both ways, in 3 feet of snow, right? My dad used to tell me this one, and you know, I was your age once. You know, I would come in like, he's like, look, son, I understand. I was your age once, but you're gonna have to. And when I was 16, 17, 18 years old, I could not conceive of my dad being my age. Just couldn't do it. Just couldn't see him that way. It wasn't until I started having my own children that I began to be able to look at my parents and go, you know, there was a time
I was your age.
that they know what I'm going through. Basically, when I got to a point in my life where my memories of them were intact, right? I have no memory of my dad at 16. Obviously, I wasn't there. So, you know, when he used to tell me I was your age once, it just right over my head. And this is one of the problems with youth, and the reason, and I'll make this comment again in a little while, but it's the reason why in these first 4 chapters, it seems like they're repeating, right? It's again, he's saying this. He's saying it a different way, but it's the same idea. It's the same deal. And so we see him say, you know, I was once just like you. When I was your age, when I was growing up, my dad, one of the things I remember him telling me when I got a car, and he told me, he said, when I was 16 years old, I got my car. He said, when I was 16 years old, I got my first, mind you, bicycle. So when he was 16 years old, that would have been for 1939, 38, 39. He said, I got my first bicycle. And then, of course, the age-old admonition, and I was glad to get it, right? I was glad to get it. And when he was 17, he was devastated. He was devastated because a guy ran a stop sign in a car and hit him on his bicycle, put him up in the windshield. He had stitches on his head. He always told me stitches, but it ruined his bicycle. The head and that didn't bother him any, right? The stitches in it, but he lost his bicycle, and that was his primary mode of transportation. And me at 16 having a car, you know, I had a bicycle when I was 7, and
Me too.
What?
And, you know, of course, we would ride all over the neighborhood. That was our pride. But when I got a car, you know, he was saying, you know, I had my first bicycle. I was glad to have that. And I was like, you know, of course, now me, right, I tell my sons, you know, I had a car at 16. My daddy bought me a car. He spent all of $400 on it. And I don't care how you do the math rated for inflation. It is exactly what it sounds like. It was a $400 car, okay? It was a car it was a Ford Pinto.
Ooh.
It was a 1970 Ford Pinto.
Ooh.
So with both windows rolled all the way up, going downhill, flat out, it might do 72 miles an hour, maybe, okay? But if you roll the windows down, there was enough pressure differential in the cab that it slowed it down quite a bit.
I had a 49 Ford with my first car.
Yeah, see, there you go. But did it have big holes in the side that you had to learn how to bondo? And
No.
yeah. I didn't have air conditioning. It didn't have a radio. Had to put a radio in it.
6 miles an hour coming down.
So when I would tell my kids, you know, my first car was what we referred to in the 70s as a dog, right? They didn't have, and I would begin to realize, oh, wait, I was that age once, and that stuff from my dad. So we see here that not only, is God speaking to us, but now we begin to see that parents haven't changed much over the years. When I was young, when I was your age, we're still saying the same things to our kids, right? We're still repeating ourselves.
Unless you don't listen.
Now, we also see in verse 4, we see that it harkens back to the 5th commandment, right? Honor thy father and thy mother that thy days may be long. And we see that when he says, my father taught me, take my words to heart, follow my commands, and you will live, right? To honor your mother and father is to basically honor God. Now, as far as wisdom coming from our parents, this predisposes that our parents are or were, moral and God-fearing people. But even so, God directs us to respect our parents, even if they aren't, right? I had a very close friend of mine who's passed away now, but one of the admonitions he always used to give me was, everyone has something to teach you. Some people teach you what to do and how to be, and some people teach you what not to do and how not to be. And it's up to you to figure it out, right? He said, that's your job. But so some people are an example to us of what to be. And some people are examples to us of what not to be. And so we can learn from everybody, and they're due our respect as those who teach us, even the negative examples, okay? My wife's father was what we called in the 80s a functioning alcoholic. And she took that lesson to heart. It's not in the house, she won't tolerate any of that. Never has. Okay? Because she took that as an example of how not to go, the path not to take, right? So the things we learn in life, if they're taught by godly and moral parents, and they lead us to a long life, if we listen, if we apply those lessons, okay? So in verse 7, I like verse 7. As I read it, it was getting wisdom is the wisest thing you can do. But coming out of King James, I think, is actually a little better phrasing. Wisdom is the principal thing. Wisdom is the key. Wisdom is the only thing of value that you will ever have in your life. Real, long-lasting value, right? I want if you think about it for a minute, think about all of the stuff that you own, and we count that for value. But how long does that value last? A house may last 30, 40, 50 years, right? A car, not nearly so long. I mean, I used to tell my kids all the time, you take care of your car because it is valuable to you in the here and now, but never lose sight of the fact it's going to end up in the junkyard. You go to the junkyard, and that is all those cars that were in that junkyard was somebody's dream, right? Those cars sat on a showroom floor or on a new car lot at one time, and somebody walked by and thought, "Whew, that's a pretty looking car," right? Okay, and then of course they made it to the second car lot, and maybe it wasn't so pretty, and then it was like, I got to have a car, that one will do, right? But it served a purpose. But the value that car brought doesn't last very long. I went to Boston some years ago, and in the streets of Boston, you can still walk around in the old city and see houses dating back to 1770s. And I say that because, I went on a walking tour, and we went to the square, quote, the city square, where the riot took place and the British fired the first shots, right? And they shot into a crowd of civilians. And the whole thing will fit in this church. It's not near as big as you might think it is. But just off of that square is Paul Revere's house. The house that Paul Revere actually lived in. So it's, 200 and some odd years old. So even if your house is a thing of value that lasts 200 years, quick question, right? Raise your hand if you know the answer. There's confidence for you. Where's Paul Revere now?
Right.
He's dead. He's in the grave. So Paul Revere doesn't own that house anymore. That house is no longer of any value to Paul Revere. You see him?
Society.
Huh?
Historical Society.
Yeah, I think actually they do. There were a couple of houses I went to in Virginia that were historical landmarks, but they were privately owned. But I think that one is a historical society that owns it. But wisdom is the principal thing. Wisdom will last. You say, well, wait a minute. You might want to make the argument, well, when I'm dead, right, what's wisdom going to do for me then? Grasshopper, right? If true wisdom has led you to God, and then wisdom lasts forever. What was it? One of the first things we learned about wisdom, the beginning of wisdom is what? The fear of God, the respect and the honoring of God. And so if you have wisdom, then you have relationship with God. If you have relationship with God, wisdom has brought you there. And wisdom then has brought you to eternal life. So when I say wisdom is the most valuable thing you will ever have, it is the key. And that's what he's saying here. Wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore, get wisdom. Remember, wisdom here, as we go through these scriptures, is synonymous with God. The Lord God Almighty, the Father who sits in heaven, and his Son, Jesus Christ, right? And with all thy getting, and I love this part, with all thy getting, we spend all of our lives. Y'all are just starting. 3 of y'all in here just starting. The rest of us are well on our way. And we spend our lives getting, don't we? Mm-hmm. Right? Do you know who advertisers target?
Okay.
They target a demographic, which is a fancy way of saying a section of the population, age 25 to 55, I think. And so all of your ads and most of your products, shirts, pants, the styles, cars, all of that is aimed at the 25 to 55 age group. Why?
They spend the most.
Because they're getting. After you get past age 55, you basically learn how to make things you've already gotten last. You quit getting so much. You quit going and spending. And before the age of 25, you ain't got a dime anyway, so nobody cares what you think. But that's why you may notice as you get older, right? You're like, man, who's making these clothes? I hate this style. I like shirts with a pocket. I like T-shirts with a pocket. You know how hard it is to find T-shirts with a pocket now?
Yeah.
Not near impossible.
Might near impossible. Why? Because that magic age group, they don't care about pockets. I want pockets, right? Pants, right? I like nice, big, deep pockets. I even like a change pocket or a pocket watch pocket, right? And you have a tough time finding those. And so we find ourselves through a lot of our lives in the mode of getting. We're getting stuff. We're gaining. We're acquiring. And I like this admonition in verse 7. It says, while you're getting stuff, don't forget to get some wisdom. Acquire some understanding. What's the old saying, right? When they called out for brains, you thought they said rain, and so you wouldn't get in line. Yeah, you went in. When they call out for brains, you ought to ask, please, sir, may I have another? Right? We need to get all the wisdom we can get. Now, again, what are we learning? We're learning that wisdom comes from where? From God. Okay? The world's, air quotes, wisdom doesn't get us anywhere. God's wisdom leads to life. And we'll see that too in a few minutes. Uh-oh. That, there we go. All right. So, of course, principle here means key or most important. And like I said, after, getting stuff, car, house, job, education, don't forget to get wisdom. Oh, come on. There we go. All right. So let's look at verses 10 through 19. Let me catch up here. My child, listen to me and do as I say. This would be repeated in the New Testament as, be not hearers of the word only, but be ye doers as well. Do as I say. You will have a long, good life. Now, stopping here for just a minute. We've seen in the first set of verses long life, right? But now we see good life. There's a qualifier here. A good life. We look at people and we wonder why some people get the good life and why some people don't. Now, again, don't look at somebody who's made $1 billion and say, well, they must have a good life. Because, yeah, not so much, right? A good life is, the way God defines it, is one that is rich in His presence. Right? Not like Christmas presents, but in His personal attention. All right? It said, I will teach you wisdom's ways and lead you in straight paths. When you walk, you won't be held back. When you run, you won't stumble. I got a couple of grandkids that are toddlers now, and they're learning how to run. Which means they can go really fast for about 4.5 or 5 feet. Then they're learning how to fall. Take hold of my instructions. Don't let them go. Guard them, for they are the key to life. And this is just coming to my mind as I'm reading this. Some years ago, like 100, there was a time in this country where they thought that dirigibles, which like blimps, everybody knows what a blimp is? Well, a blimp is just a balloon with a basket hanging under it. A dirigible actually had a framework. So it was a rigid airship, what they call it. The Hindenburg was one, yeah. And so they thought that those were going to be the future of transportation back in the 20s and 30s. Because airplanes were just brand new, barely off the ground, if you'll forgive the pun. And so they had these, was it that bad a pun? Was that bad? Really? Don's over going, oh man, first the chickens, now the airplanes. So they thought, because you could travel in style and luxury. And remember, the fastest way to travel at that time was either by train or by steamship. Right? And so these things were faster than each of those. So they would, they could travel in straight lines, and faster than a steamship. So transatlantic travel. But there was one instance where they had one coming into dock, and docking for one of these airships consisted of getting kind of low to the ground, throwing over ropes, and having a bunch of guys run out and grab them. and then pull the thing down while they basically let some gas out of the envelope so that they kind of got it down, and they get it tied off and reel it in like a fishing line. Right? So they were doing that. It was in New York. They were doing that, and a sudden gust of wind hit, and there were 5 or 6 sailors, United States Navy personnel, and they had a hold of the rope, and they were hanging on to that rope for dear life, and the wind hit, and that airship leapt back up into the air, I mean literally, and took all 6 or 7 of them up in the air with it. They were dangling from this rope. And one by one, they got tired, and they fell off until there was only one guy left. And it took, I forget now, an hour and a half or a couple of hours for this airship to get stabilized, get swung all the way back around, get back into the landing pattern, and make another approach. And this kid hung on the whole time. When they got back and they finally got low enough to the ground, his feet touched the ground, he let go and, of course, collapsed, exhausted. And they grabbed him, rushed him to the hospital. Reporters later asked him, how did you hang on so long? How did you have the stamina to hang on so long? He said, all I had to do was hang on longer than everybody else. And as soon as the last guy dropped off the rope, he said, I tied the rope onto my arm. He said, and the rope held on to me, right? And so he found a way to embed, okay, that rope so that the rope was doing most of the work. Take hold of my instructions. Don't let them go. Guard them, for they are the key to life. Sometimes we've got to change our way of thinking, right? And we think, by my own strength, I have to hold on to this. But when he says, wisdom will give you a crown, wisdom will allow you to walk, and I think what he's talking about is let wisdom do the work. Just follow its lead, right? Let it hold you up. Don't turn loose of it. Let it hold you. Let it mold you. Let it make you. Let it guide you. And so when I read that verse, that's what came to my mind is this kid, he took a hold of that rope and then he tied it to himself so that he couldn't let go. All right, picking up verse 14. Don't do as the wicked do. Don't follow the path of evildoers. Don't even think about it. Don't go that way. Turn away and keep moving, for evil people can't sleep until they've done their evil deed for the day. They can't rest until they've caused someone to stumble. They eat the food of wickedness, drink the wine of violence. That's some pretty deep imagery there. The way of the righteous is like the first gleam of dawn, which shines ever brighter until the full light of day. But the way of the wicked is like total darkness. They have no idea what you're stumbling over. Anybody over the age of 55 who's had to get up once or twice in a night to go to the bathroom knows that feeling of stumbling over something in the dark, right? And it usually involves your little pinky toe, right? You kick that bedstead or you trip over the dog you couldn't see laying there. So in verse 12, we see when you walk, you won't be held back. When you run, you won't stumble, right? How many times have you ever felt like in your life, you're taking one step forward and 2 steps back, right? We use that expression occasionally, right? We feel like the harder I work, the behinder I get. Yeah. Yeah. So wisdom helps keep us from that hamster in the wheel. Right? You ever seen a hamster? You put a little wheel in there, and that hamster will get in that wheel and just run. And then if they figure out if they can latch onto the bars, they'll just go round and round and round and round. But they'll run and run and run. So, little side note, for a time, we kept a pet rat. We were feeding pet snakes, and the pet rat got too big for the pet snakes, and so it got named, and anything with a name couldn't be fed to anything else. So we had a pet rat, learned a lot about rats. Rats are very smart critters. You know, you can put a wheel in there for them, and they look at you like you're nuts. They will not get in it, and that's about the most worthless thing that there is. You know, you could take a guinea pig. We had one of those when the kids were growing up. You could put the guinea pigs, and you've seen them, those big plastic balls. You can turn them loose in the house, and they'll run all over the house. You know, a rat, you put a rat in one of those, and it just sits there and looks at you. What do you want from me? I'm not running around in this thing, right? Because they recognize the useless nature of that. But us poor humans, right, what do? We get on that wheel of life in that plastic ball of get more, get richer, and around we go, right? Never truly getting the thing which satisfies us. And that's what wisdom gives us, a life that is satisfying. Again, you know, for those of you who might be watching at home, don't equate riches, stuff, with satisfaction, right? God is the satisfier. You can be satisfied with a old used car, an old house, you know, because you know where your salvation is. Okay, you know where God is because you value the relationship. A lot of people that I talk to, oh yeah, I believe in God, but when I start talking about the relationship that you should have with God, that personal, friend-like relationship. You know, Jesus did us probably the greatest compliment that we could have ever received when he said, I no longer call you servants, but I call you friends. Mm-hmm. And he was indicating that the true nature of the relationship that God wants with us is one of friendship, right? What was Abraham known for? Was he known as one of the richest men in the world? He was. Was he known as the biggest camel owner, biggest herd of camel owner, having the most sheep, No, he was known as what? A friend of God. A friend of God. Okay? And so this is the relationship that he wants. And so we see here that wisdom gives us that satisfied life, right? So both of these, of course, you know, the one step forward, 2 steps back, harder I work, the behinder I get. These indicate a life situation where wisdom hasn't been applied practically, right? A life where we're leaning on the world's definitions and the world's goals, right? You know, there are some circles in life, you may find this hard to believe, there are some circles in life where if you haven't made $1 million by the time you're 30, you're a failure. I ain't made $1 million yet. Well, at least I don't have $1 million. I guess if you add up every penny I ever made, maybe I've made $1 million over the entire course of my life, but I spent most of it. But we see lives that where wisdom could really come in handy. We know people like this, right? They can't keep a job. You ever known somebody like that? Every job they go to, it's like, well, you know, that job was a joke. That boss was a joke. And, you know, every 6 months, boom, 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 boom. Every job they ever get was, and you're like, so what is the common denominator here? Well, the only reason you can see that is because you have wisdom. The common denominator is this person, whoever it is, right? The common denominator is you. So if you can't keep a job, the reason must be you can't keep your mouth shut. You can't show up on time. I get on Facebook occasionally, and there was one here not too long ago. some person, I don't know how, whether it was a young person or an old person, must have been a young person, but I don't know. They were complaining, I got fired, and I got fired because I was running 102 fever, and I was there at the job, and they wouldn't listen to me, and I was crying, and they kept saying, what's the matter with me? And they fired me. And I'm like, okay, so there's more here than we're being told, right? And sometimes injustice occurs. I myself, I know that you might find this hard to believe, I myself have been fired for what I felt like was unjust cause. And I took my check and my referral and I said, see ya, and I went and got another job, right? But I didn't get fired from that one. I rode that one into the ground, and when the job was over and they said, well, there was nothing left to do, go on, and I went and got another one. And so you see that there's a difference. These people that, I quit that job. I got fired from that job. Or I was going to quit it before they fired me, right? Well, there's a lack of wisdom there. How are we taught by Scripture to work? As unto the Lord. We work for that person as if we were working for Jesus. He is not Jesus, but we work as if he was Jesus. Because if we please our God, who then changes the hearts of men?
That same God.
That same God. So if we please God, God then puts into the hearts of men to reward us. Right? It was God that changed the heart of Pharaoh. It was God that moves in those hearts, right? Any raise you've ever gotten, any job you've ever been given, wasn't because that person liked you. It was because God had favor on you. And he put it into the heart of that person to like you or to give you reward. All right? Can't keep up with the bills. I had, when we were much younger, I think I've relayed this before, but when we were much younger, we had some friends, and it was always, 2 days before payday, and we were out of money. So they go write a check over here, get some cash so they could pay this bill over here. Then they go write a check over here so they could go put it in the bank to cover that check over here, which paid this bill over there. And then the paycheck would come in, and but we're out of money. So they would start doing that again. Now there's a name for that, right? And our pastor at the time, when he heard this was going on, and it was more than just one couple. That one couple was in pretty dire straits, but it was more than just that one couple. He had a biblical financial course. In other words, how to arrange your finances according to biblical principle. And wouldn't you know it? 6 months, everybody was lined out. I mean, they were, but wisdom was applied. Okay? And so that's what we're talking about here when he talks about, when you walk, you won't be held back. He's not talking about the physical walking. He's talking about our walk through life. When you run, you won't stumble. Anybody ever stumbled when you're running? Right? You get that really weird gait where you're slinging your arms around like this and you're leaned way over, and all you can see is your nose hitting the ground. And even what? Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to bring up any bad memories.
Someone's feeling attacked already.
I picked up Tony enough. I figured you must. Even if you don't fall, right? What's the first thing you do when you regain your balance?
Look, Rusty, I saw you.
Yeah. Did anybody see that? Okay. Etc. Etc. So we've talked about this before. Wisdom is personified here. Wisdom is being spoken of as if it were a person. Okay, even though it is not, but it's being spoken of as if it were a person. Back in chapter 2, we were introduced to the two nemeses, and that is the plural version of nemesis. Okay, I looked it up. The two nemeses of wisdom. Batman had a nemesis, right? The Joker.
Yeah.
Actually, back in the 60s, Batman had several Joker, the Penguin, the Riddler, all those guys. But every hero, you ever notice that? Every hero has a nemesis, right? Because he's not a hero if there's no nemesis. I mean, I don't know what it is, okay? But wisdom has two, and we were introduced to them back in chapter 2. You remember? Evil people, the wicked doer. That's personified, like wisdom is personified as a woman. Evil doers were personified as men, okay? And it spoke about these members, or these evil people, but it spoke about them operating as friends, right? Equals, members of the same group. Come and let us go. Let us do this. Let us get rich. Let us this. Let us that, right? So, like bringing you into the family, making you a part. We care. Right? The other was the strange woman, which could be basically summarized as uncontrolled desire or lust personified, right? Seducing. The new thing. You've never seen this before, Donnie. You need to see this. This is something that, I mean, every well-rounded individual needs to have seen this in their life, right? And so this is what fights against wisdom, is these ideas. The uncontrolled desire, I mean, the first thing I could think of was bright lights, big city. It's seductive, right? The new thing, customs, experiences you may have been shielded from growing up, right? We all go through this, right? We grow up, we become adults, and suddenly we answer to no one. And for a lot of folks, that's a moment, right? They kind of go wild until they get their bearings again. The Amish actually open the gates and tell their kids, go out into the world and do your thing, because if you're going to stay here, it's going to be because you want to stay here. And a lot of Amish kids leave and never come back, right? They get out there in that big world and realize that, oh, look at this. I've never seen this before. I've never done this. There's a chapter in Acts where Paul goes to Areopagus Hill, Mars Hill, and the people who sat on that hill, that's what they did with their time, to hear and to tell something new. Just that new thing, that latest conspiracy theory, right? You know that guy on the job, right? He'll walk up to you and, you know any good rumors? No, you want to start one? Right? So it's all about it. And that's a seductive, there's one on every job.
We got one.
There's one on every job. But that's a seductive thing, right? It brings you in. I've never seen this before. How interesting this is. Now, here in verse 14, we see one of them introduced again. The other one appears in chapter 14. But like I was talking about a minute ago, right? We saw, when it started talking about the evil men, turn away, don't do what they do, don't follow them, was very reminiscent of chapter 2 and that discussion of evil people, right? The wicked. And yes, it's redundant. It's the same thing, but isn't that how we teach our children? We repeat the same things over and over and over and over and over and over. There's a commercial that I remember. I tried to find a version of it and I couldn't do it. But it shows a young teenage girl. She comes out of the house. Her mother is standing in the doorway. She says, bye, have a good time. And a carload full of kids, they're waving at her. And she runs down the sidewalk and she gets in the car. She looks back out the window, waves at her mother standing in the door, and turns back. And suddenly her mother is sitting right next to her. And she says, buckle your seatbelt, honey. So the girl grabs and buckles her seatbelt, right? And then, of course, mom is back on the porch, and the car starts to pull away, and one of the people in the back seat tries to hand her an alcoholic drink, a beer or something. And her mother's sitting right there next to her again. No, baby, we don't drink alcohol. That's bad for you. Right? She goes, no, thank you. And she turns it down. A couple of other things happen. And then one of the boys from the front seat, would be a boy, right? One of the boys, he turns around and he hands a joint back and says, hey, how about taking a hit of this? And she looks, and there's nobody sitting next to her. And the admonition was, you talk to your kids about make sure you buckle your seatbelts, don't drink, don't do. But did you talk to them about drugs, right? Because, even if you don't think you're being heard, they're listening, right? And so since Mama had never told her what to do, well, sure, she takes this in. So yeah, we're going to see a lot of these same things repeat over and over and over as we read through Proverbs. It's because that's the way that we teach, right? We do this by repetition. 20 through 27. My child, pay attention to what I say. That's the third time this chapter we've been told to listen. Right? And you know why? Because even God looking down at us is like watching us go. Right? Our attention spans, even as adults. Yeah. You ever tried to talk to a 2-year-old? Okay? Their attention span is like that. Right? Well, in relationship to God, our attention span isn't even that long. Right? God says, listen to what I'm. No, don't look at the bright lights. Come back over here. Right? Listen to what I'm saying. Listen carefully to my words. Don't lose sight of them. Let them penetrate deep into your heart, for they bring life to those who find them. There's that reference to life again. Healing to the whole body. Guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life. That's an interesting concept. We'll talk about that here in a minute. Avoid all perverse talk. Stay away from corrupt speech. Look straight ahead. Fix your eyes on what lies before you. Make out a straight path for your feet. Stay on the straight path. Don't get sidetracked or keep your feet from following evil. Don't get sidetracked. Keep your feet from following evil. Verses 20 through 26 here convey a single idea. Right? They're trying to encompass this complex idea. The heart here that it refers to is not an organ, right? And we've kind of talked about this before. It's not an organ. It is actually the core of the soul, the place from which your life is directed. So they're not talking about that thump, thump, thump in your chest, right? They're talking about your soul, that thing that decides who you're going to be, what you're going to do. Matthew 13 and 15, Jesus is speaking. This people's heart is waxed. He's quoting. People's heart is waxed gross. Their ears are dull of hearing. Their eyes they have closed, lest at any time they should see with their eyes, hear with their ears, and should understand with their heart, and should be converted, and I should heal them. Jesus is acknowledging the same thing that Proverbs is teaching us, that the heart directs our life. It's the seat of our intelligence, our wisdom. We have to be careful to guard the heart, because hearing is an entrance into the heart. Okay? Scripture teaches us faith comes by what? Hearing. Huh? Don't start with me. Don't start with me. He's back all of 2 weeks. Already he's giving me grief. Faith comes by hearing. Hearing is a direct route into the heart. What we hear is important. We should be careful about what we hear. If we listen only to conspiracy theories, the government is hiding UFOs, there are really little gray people in Area 51. It's not Area 51, it's Hangar 51, but never mind. But, then, You know, that's all we're going to talk. I knew a guy one time. You couldn't spend 2 minutes with him. He wasn't talking about fishing. Bass boats, the latest lures, fishing rods. I don't know, what's wrong with fishing, right? The only thing that's wrong with fishing in an instance like that is that's all he ever talked about. I told him one time, I said, man, you know, one time I went fishing. And there was, I heard a story of a guy who went fishing. There was a gold coin in his mouth. He said, oh, you're lying. I said, no, that's the truth. I said, Jesus told him, go fishing and get this fish. And then he realized what I was doing, and he's like, he wouldn't talk to me no more. But I thought, dude, you're all about fishing. I got a fishing story for you.
A true one.
A true one. There's this one fella got swallowed by this ginormous fish. So be careful what you hear. It was a ginormous fish. Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field. Genesis 3, which the Lord had made. And he said to the woman, yea, has God said, you shall not eat of the tree of the garden? And the woman said to the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat. That is true. That is true. And that is where the true stops. Look what she says. Next. Neither shall ye touch it. God didn't say nothing about touching it. He didn't say you couldn't touch it. I mean, Adam could have chopped that tree down and made a house out of it. He couldn't eat it. But when she said that, the devil had his opening because she hadn't listened. There's an example of not listening properly. Then she listened to the wrong thing. And the serpent said unto the woman, you shall not die, for God knows in the day you eat of it, your eyes shall be opened. You shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. And that was certainly true. But she was listening. And that went right into her heart, because the next verse is when she saw that the tree was good, right? When she saw. So my thinking is the scripture does not support this. It does not say this specifically. So just understand. I think she went up to it, and she reached up, and she pulled the fruit off of it, and she touched it. She looked around, she said, well, I didn't die. But when she bit into it, that's when it hit her, right? She knew then, right? So be careful what you hear, because this is an entrance into the heart. And if we're listening to corruption, it will corrupt our heart. Be careful what you see, because this is also a route into the heart. The way to a man's heart is not through his belly, okay? It is through his ears and through his eyes. And you can make whatever connection there you want. But look what happens here. Peter went over, Matthew 14, 29 and 30. Peter went over the side of the boat, walked on the water toward Jesus. But when he saw the strong wind and the waves, he was terrified and began to speak. What we see, sink. What did I say? Speak? He's not speaking, he's sinking. Actually, he did speak. He did speak. He did, Jesus, help me. He was terrified and began to sink. Okay? Which is, you know, in electrical terms, he became one with the waves.
Most definitely.
But because of what he saw, he began to lose faith. Right? And we can do that. We can fill our eyes with the wrong kinds of things. And it causes us to lose faith. I was doing this research. I found a website, and the guy said 10 verses your preacher doesn't want you to know. And of course he went on a long diatribe about how, you know, the Bible is hidden from people. I'm thinking, where's this guy been growing up? Because Bibles are everywhere. And then, you know, he began to quote these scriptures, and he was completely misquoting them. I said, that's not the way it says it. But there are people who will fill their eyes with that. Now, Jesus promised us with the Holy Spirit what? We would take in any deadly thing and it couldn't harm us. If we filled our hearts with the truth, we can spot the lie. But if we haven't filled our hearts with the truth, the lie comes in as the truth and corrupts us. Okay? And be careful where you go. And in Genesis 13:10, Lot took a long look at the fertile plains of the Jordan Valley in the direction of Zoar. The whole area was well watered, like the garden of the Lord or the beautiful land of Egypt. You know what else was down in that valley? Sodom and Gomorrah. And Lot immersed himself in that environment, and Adam went away from that environment. So hearing, seeing, and our Abraham. Did I say Adam?
Yeah, you did.
It's been a long week. It's been a long week. Abraham.
I wasn't gonna correct you though, I was gonna be polite.
You was going to be polite?
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be the first time.
Well,
So, but thank you, brother.
That's a star.
That's a star. You
Yeah.
get a star for the night. Abraham, he didn't go, he chose a different place. He wouldn't live amongst the wicked, right? And that's what we're seeing, don't do as the wicked do. Don't fill your eyes, don't listen to that stuff, and don't put yourself in an environment where you're surrounded by that. Because eventually, we know what happened a lot, right? Eventually, you're living in a cave, and the rest of it will leave for another lesson. Why? Why are we guarding our hearts? Because Jesus told us what comes out of our mouth, the words that we speak, comes from the heart. Listen to somebody long enough, you'll know what they believe. You'll know what their treasure is. You'll know what they've been filling themselves up with. Like I was telling you, that guy, right? You start talking to him, he's talking fishing. Fishing lures, fishing boats, fish, places to fish, right? And so that's all that came out of him, was fish. And it's like my grandmother used to say, right? House guests are like fish. It's really nice the first day, but after 3 days, they both start to stink a little, right? And so all he could talk about was fish. That's all he knew, okay? Proverbs 21:2, and we'll get to this later, but people may be right in their own eyes, but the Lord examines the what? The heart. The word examines here means to ponder. That is a deep examination of an item, to ponder something, right? He examines the heart. All right? And then finally in verse 27, it's don't get sidetracked or distracted. In King James, it's don't turn to the left, don't turn to the right. And I find that interesting because Jesus would tell us later, right? Enter by the narrow gate. Wide is the gate, and broad is the way that leads to destruction. Many are to go in by it. The straight path, the narrow gate, means we have to stay. We can't turn a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right. Right, I got that. I got that one right. Because we get off that path. And it's easy to get off. Right? So we have to guard our hearts. Make sure what we're putting in it so that what comes out of it is something that provides life, that provides wisdom. Okay. And look at there, 8 o'clock.
8:03.
2 after.
Your clocks are fast.
That was slow.
6:03. 6:03.
California.
All right.
Oh, yeah,
So
okay.
let's have some prayer requests. We have any prayer requests tonight?